This is Midnight Dark. Subscribe US for more. The borehole recordings. In 1973, a Soviet deep drilling project in Siberia penetrated further into the earth than any human had ever gone before. At 40,000 feet below the surface, their equipment began picking up sounds that shouldn't exist. Sounds that suggested they'd broken through into something that was never meant to be disturbed. The official records were classified for 50 years. Until now. Faint, disturbing sounds from deep underground. What you're about to hear is the reconstructed account of Dr. Yelena Volkov, the geophysicist whose discoveries in the deepest hole on Earth changed everything we thought we knew about what lies beneath our feet. Dr. Yelena Volkov had dedicated her life to understanding the planet's hidden depths. As the Soviet Union's leading expert on deep Earth geology, she spent 15 years studying seismic data, mineral compositions, and the thermal dynamics of the Earth's interior. She thought she understood what lay beneath the surface of the world. She was wrong. The Kola Superdeep Borehole project had begun in 1970 as part of the Soviet Union's ambitious scientific program to drill deeper into the Earth than any previous expedition. The goal was to reach 15,000 meters, nearly 50,000 feet, and collect data about the planet's geological structure that could revolutionize human understanding of planetary formation. By 1973, the project had already achieved several remarkable breakthroughs. They discovered microscopic organisms living at depths and temperatures that should have been impossible for life to survive. They found water at depths where no water should exist, and rock formations that challenged conventional theories about geological pressure and heat. But as the drill approached the 12,000-meter mark, something changed. Yelena first noticed the anomaly in the acoustic monitoring data. Deep drilling operations typically produce a consistent pattern of sounds: the grinding of metal against rock, the operation of machinery, and the occasional crack or shift in geological formations. What she was seeing in the data was something entirely different. The microphones lowered into the borehole were picking up sounds that seemed to come from even deeper in the earth. Not the random noise of shifting rock or underground water, but patterns that suggested organization, purpose, and most disturbing of all, intelligence. Dr. Volkov, you need to hear this, her assistant, Pavel Kedrov, called from the monitoring station. His face was pale despite the warm underground facility, and his hands were shaking as he adjusted the audio equipment. The sound that emerged from the speakers was unlike anything in Yelena's experience. It started as a low-frequency hum, barely audible but felt as much as heard. But layered within that fundamental tone were harmonics that created an almost musical quality, not human music, but something that suggested melody and rhythm from a completely alien perspective. How deep is that coming from? Yelena asked, though she dreaded the answer. Pavel consulted his instruments. The source appears to be at least 2,000 meters below our current drilling depth. But the acoustic properties don't match any known geological phenomena. Over the following days, the sounds became more complex and more disturbing. What had started as simple harmonic patterns evolved into something that resembled communication, rhythmic pulses that varied in intensity and frequency, as if something deep in the earth was responding to the intrusion of the drilling operation. Yelena began recording everything, documenting not just the sounds themselves but their effects on the drilling team. Several workers reported vivid nightmares featuring underground caverns filled with moving shadows. Others complained of hearing whispers in languages they didn't recognize, coming from the depths of the borehole even when all equipment was shut down. Most troubling were the physical effects. Dr. Alexandrov, the project's senior geologist, developed a persistent cough that produced sputum flecked with minerals that didn't exist in the local geological formations. 3 different technicians reported finding strange marks on their bodies, geometric patterns that look almost like writing, appearing overnight with no explanation. But Yelena was too fascinated by the scientific implications to heed the warning signs. She convinced her superiors to install more sophisticated audio recording equipment, including directional microphones that could isolate sounds from specific depths and frequencies. What they discovered defied every law of physics and biology that Yelena had spent her career studying. At 13,500 meters, the microphones picked up what could only be described as breathing. Not the mechanical sounds of gas escaping through rock fissures, but rhythmic inhalation and exhalation that suggested massive lung capacity. The breathing was slow and deep, with pauses that lasted for minutes at a time, as if whatever was producing the sound was in some form of hibernation. At 14,200 meters, they recorded sounds that resembled footsteps, heavy, deliberate impacts against stone that echoed through subterranean chambers of impossible size. The acoustic analysis suggested cavities in the earth that were kilometers wide, existing at depths where the pressure should have collapsed any void space millions of years ago. Most disturbing of all were the vocalizations captured at 14,800 meters. The sounds were clearly organic in nature, produced by vocal cords or some analogous structure, but they were unlike any terrestrial life form. The pitch ranged from subsonic frequencies that could only be felt as vibrations in the chest to ultrasonic calls that made the monitoring equipment malfunction. But within that alien range of sounds, patterns emerged that suggested language, complex grammatical structures that repeated and varied in ways that implied meaning and intention. Yelena spent sleepless nights analyzing the recordings, using computer programs to break down the vocalizations into component frequencies and rhythmic patterns. What she found kept her awake for reasons that had nothing to do with scientific excitement and everything to do with primal terror. The voices were responding to the drilling operation. Each day, as the drill bit deeper, the sounds from below became more frequent and more agitated. Whatever lived in the Earth's depths was aware of the human intrusion and was reacting with increasing urgency to the approach of the drilling equipment. More horrifying still, Yelena began to recognize individual voices in the recordings. Not human voices, but distinct vocal signatures that suggested a community of beings living in the deepest reaches of the planet. She catalogued at least 17 different speakers, each with unique tonal qualities and what appeared to be different roles in their underground society. Dr. Kedrov made the breakthrough that changed everything. Working late one night with the newest recordings, he discovered that the alien vocalizations weren't random, they were mathematical. The beings below were transmitting complex equations and geometric proofs using their voices as a medium of calculation. Dr. Volkov, Pavel called, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "You need to see this. They're not just talking to each other. They're talking to us." The evidence was undeniable. The mathematical sequences being vocalized corresponded exactly to the drilling operation's progress. The beings below were calculating the drill's rate of descent, predicting its path, and most terrifyingly, providing solutions to engineering problems that the drilling team hadn't even realized they were facing. The entities in the Earth's depths were helping the humans reach them. Yelena realized that the project had fundamentally changed. What had begun as a scientific expedition to study the planet's interior had become something far more dangerous: first contact with a form of life that had existed beneath human civilization for millennia, completely unknown and utterly alien. She tried to convince her superiors to halt the drilling, but the Soviet scientific establishment was not easily deterred. The potential discovery of subterranean life would be the greatest scientific achievement in human history, elevating Soviet prestige and advancing human knowledge in ways that could revolutionize biology, geology, and physics. The decision was made to accelerate the drilling operation. As the bore penetrated the 15,000-meter mark, the sounds from below reached a crescendo that required the audio equipment to be turned down to prevent damage to sensitive instruments. But even with the volume reduced, the vocalizations had physical effects on everyone in the facility. Workers began experiencing shared hallucinations. They reported seeing movement in their peripheral vision, shadows that shouldn't exist in the brightly lit underground facility. Several complained of feeling watched, as if invisible eyes were studying them from impossible angles. Dr. Alexandrov was the first to make direct contact. Working alone during the night shift, monitoring the drilling progress as the bore approached 15,500 meters, he began hearing voices that weren't coming through the audio equipment. The beings below were somehow projecting their communications directly into his mind, bypassing his ears entirely and speaking to him in Russian. The conversation, which Alexandrov recorded in his private journal before his disappearance, was both enlightening and terrifying. "You have traveled far to reach us, surface dweller. Who are you? What are you? We are what you will become, given sufficient time and pressure. We are humanity's future, buried in the depths until the surface world is ready to join us. That's impossible. Humans evolve on the surface. We've never lived underground. Your species has such limited memory. You remember only the most recent chapter of your story. We are the civilization that came before, the one that retreated to the deep places when the surface became uninhabitable. We have been waiting for our descendants to develop the technology to find us again." Alexandrov's journal entries became increasingly erratic as the conversations continued. The beings claimed to be the remnants of an advanced human civilization that had survived a global catastrophe by adapting to life in vast underground caverns. Over millions of years, they had evolved to thrive in high-pressure, high-temperature environments, developing technology and consciousness far beyond surface humanity's understanding. But their evolutionary path had come at a cost. They could no longer survive in the low-pressure environment of the Earth's surface. If surface humanity wanted to join them, it would need to undergo the same evolutionary process, a transformation that would take generations and require abandoning everything that defined human civilization. The final entry in Alexandrov's journal was a single sentence: "They have shown me the deep places. I understand now what we must become." He vanished that night, leaving no trace except his journal and a pile of clothes found beside the borehole. Security footage showed him approaching the drilling apparatus, but the cameras malfunctioned before recording what happened next. Yelena knew that the project had to be stopped. Whatever lived in the Earth's depths, they represented a threat to surface humanity that went beyond physical danger. They were offering a form of salvation that required the complete extinction of human civilization as it currently existed. But when she tried to raise the alarm, she discovered that several of her colleagues had also been making contact with the underground entities. Dr. Petrov from the geology team, Engineer Volkov from the drilling operation, and 3 different technicians had all reported similar telepathic communications. More disturbing still, they were all convinced that the deep dwellers were offering humanity a gift rather than a threat. The beings below had shown them visions of vast underground cities where evolved humans live in harmony with the planet's deep structures, free from the environmental destruction and social conflicts that plague surface civilization. The drilling continued, now driven by personnel who believed they were participating in humanity's next evolutionary leap rather than a scientific research project. At 16,000 meters, the drill broke through into empty space. The cavity beyond was enormous. Sonar readings suggested a chamber over 50 kilometers in diameter, existing in impossible defiance of geological pressure. But more important than the size was what the chamber contained. The first images transmitted by cameras lowered into the cavity showed structures that were clearly artificial. Geometric forms that rose from the chamber floor like crystalline trees, connected by pathways that followed mathematical principles no surface mathematician had ever conceived. The architecture was beautiful and alien, suggesting minds that understood three-dimensional space in ways that human perception could barely process. But it was the inhabitants that made Yelena realize the true scope of what they had discovered. The beings that moved through the underground city bore a disturbing resemblance to humans, but they had been changed by millions of years of subterranean evolution. Tall and thin, with elongated limbs adapted for navigating high-pressure environments, they moved with fluid grace through spaces that would crush surface humans instantly. Their skin was translucent, revealing internal structures that pulse with bioluminescent light. Their eyes were large and dark, adapted for life in absolute darkness but somehow capable of perceiving the camera equipment lowering into their domain. Most disturbing of all, they were clearly intelligent and clearly aware of the surface intrusion. Groups of them gathered around the camera equipment, studying the technology with obvious curiosity and making vocalizations that the audio equipment translated into mathematical concepts too advanced for surface science to comprehend. Yelena watched in horror as the beings began to climb. Using appendages that were part hand and part tentacle, they attached themselves to the drilling cables and began ascending the borehole. Their biology allowed them to survive the crushing pressure of the deep earth, but Yelena realized they were attempting something that should have been impossible, traveling to the surface world that they had abandoned millions of years ago. The first deep dweller reached the drilling platform at 3:47 a.m. on November 15, 1973. Security footage showed a figure emerging from the borehole that was recognizably humanoid but wrong in every detail. Nearly 9 feet tall, with limbs that seemed to bend in too many places, it moved with alien grace through the underground facility. The being didn't attack the night shift workers. Instead, it approached them with what appeared to be curiosity and perhaps even affection, touching their faces with appendages that left luminescent traces on human skin. The workers reported feeling overwhelming sensations of love and belonging, as if they were being welcomed home by family members they had never known existed. By morning, 17 more deep dwellers had reached the surface. Yelena found the facility transformed. The beings had integrated themselves into the human work crews, not as conquerors but as teachers and guides. Using their advanced understanding of mathematics and physics, they began modifying the drilling equipment with improvements that increased efficiency by orders of magnitude. More troubling, they began modifying the humans. The luminescent traces left by their touch weren't just marks, they were some form of symbiotic organism that began changing human biology at the cellular level. Workers reported increased strength, improved night vision, and the ability to withstand environmental pressures that would normally be fatal. But the changes went deeper than physical adaptation. The affected humans began experiencing shared consciousness with the deep dwellers, accessing memories and knowledge that belonged to the underground civilization. They spoke of vast libraries carved into living rock, of technologies that use geological processes as power sources, and of mathematical principles that revealed the true geometric structure of reality. Yelena realized that the drilling project had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams and failed beyond anyone's worst nightmares. They had discovered that humanity was not alone on Earth, but the other intelligence they'd found was a version of humanity that had chosen a completely different evolutionary path. The deep dwellers weren't invading the surface world. They were recruiting their surface cousins to join them in the depths, offering genetic modification that would allow humans to survive in the high-pressure environment of the deep earth. But accepting that offer meant abandoning everything that surface humanity had built. The underground civilization was advanced and beautiful, but it existed in environments where human art, literature, and culture would be impossible to maintain. The choice was between remaining human in the traditional sense or becoming something greater but fundamentally different. Yelena made her decision when she realized that the choice was being made for all of humanity, not just the workers at the drilling site. The deep dwellers were already expanding their influence beyond the facility. Using their modified human allies as intermediaries, they were making contact with other underground installations across the Soviet Union. Their goal wasn't to conquer surface civilization but to offer every human the opportunity to evolve beyond the limitations of surface existence. But evolution, Yelena realized, was just another word for extinction. Even if the deep dwellers' offer was genuinely benevolent, Accepting it would mean the end of human civilization as it had existed for millennia. She initiated the emergency protocols that she hoped would seal the borehole and prevent further contact between surface and deep civilizations. The explosion that destroyed the Kola facility was officially attributed to a drilling accident. The borehole was sealed with concrete and marked as too dangerous for further exploration. The surviving personnel were debriefed, given cover stories about equipment failures and gas leaks, and transferred to other projects with strict orders never to discuss their experiences. But Yelena knew that sealing the borehole wouldn't end the contact between surface and deep humanity. The beings below had learned about the surface world and were actively seeking other ways to make contact with their evolutionary cousins. Her final report, classified at the highest levels of the Soviet government, contained a warning that went unheeded for decades. The entities encountered in the Kola drilling project represent an existential threat to surface humanity, not through malice but through an offer of evolutionary advancement that would fundamentally alter our species. They will continue attempting contact through other deep drilling operations worldwide. Future projects must be monitored for signs of similar encounters, and contingency plans must be developed for preventing large-scale contact between surface and deep civilizations. The report was filed and forgotten until oil drilling operations in the North Sea began reporting similar acoustic anomalies in 1983. By then, Yelena had died under mysterious circumstances, her body found at the bottom of a mine shaft with evidence of crushing damage consistent with extreme depth pressure. But her recordings survived, hidden in archives that have only recently been declassified. The sounds from the deep earth continue. Every major drilling operation eventually penetrates depths where the microphones pick up vocalizations that shouldn't exist. The mathematical communications continue, growing more sophisticated as the deep dwellers learn to interface with surface technology. And sometimes, when drilling crews work alone in the deepest parts of the earth, they report feeling welcome. They describe visions of vast underground cities where humans have learned to thrive in harmony with the planet's deepest structures. They speak of evolutionary opportunities that would allow surface humanity to survive environmental catastrophes that might make the Earth's surface uninhabitable. The deep dwellers are still recruiting. Still offering their gift of evolutionary advancement to any surface human willing to abandon the limitations of life in the upper atmosphere. The question isn't whether they're still down there. The question is whether humanity will eventually accept their invitation to join them in the depths. Because according to the mathematical models they've been transmitting, the surface world doesn't have much time left. The Kola Superdeep Borehole was permanently sealed, but the knowledge of what lies beneath remains. Every deep drilling operation since 1973 has been monitored for similar contacts, and the results are classified at levels that suggest ongoing communication with deep earth entities. The question isn't whether we'll encounter them again. The question is whether we'll be ready to make the choice they're offering when the time comes. Faint voices from deep underground, then silence.